Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, time now for our next session where we turn the spotlight on the new Syria. We assess the progress the country has made over the last 12 months, the opportunities it has seized and the challenges that still lie ahead. December 8th, 2024 is now commemorated in Syria as Liberation Day, when opposition armed forces entered Damascus and declared Bashar al-Assad's rule over. Those events, you'll remember, unfolded during the last Doha Forum, taking the world by surprise and reshaping regional dynamics in ways very few expected, and of course, needless to say, overshadowing much of the discussions here at the Doha Forum. Our next session looks at what has changed over the last year, what has been achieved, and what challenges still lie ahead. Please welcome our distinguished panelists, Their Excellencies Mohammed bin Abdulaziz Al-Khulaifi, Minister of State of the State of Qatar, Asad Al-Shaibani, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Syrian Arab Republic, Espen Barth Eide, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Norway, and last but not least, Tom Barrack, US Ambassador to the Republic of Türkiye and Special Envoy to the Syrian Arab Republic. And please welcome your moderator, Charles Lister, Director of the Syria Program at the Middle East Institute. How are you? Hello. Hello.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this latest session of the Doha Forum. My name is Charles Lister from the Middle East Institute, and I'm delighted to be here on such an esteemed stage with esteemed colleagues. Last year, the Doha Forum witnessed history as Bashar al-Assad's regime came to an abrupt and dramatic end, closing a 53-year chapter of brutal dictatorial rule in Syria. In the year since, the country's transition has proceeded forwards, facing down an extraordinary array of internal and external challenges. On the international stage, Syria has transformed from a global pariah to a fully fledged and, I think many would say, integral component of the international community. In fact, I gather that Syria has received in 12 months more international delegations from more countries around the world than Syria has done over the previous 5 decades. At home, Syria bears the brunt of 14 years of debilitating conflict and decades of corrupt, divisive rule, leaving a broken economy, a traumatized population, a shattered state, and massive destruction. But despite all of these challenges, the world has rushed to engage and support the new Syria. I think buoyed by the historic opportunity that a stable, responsible, and recovering Syria will offer to regional and international peace and prosperity. So let me first start with Minister Shaibani. It's very good to see you again, and thank you for being here. As you reflect on this past year, how would you summarize where things stand today after 12 months in terms of achievements, but also, I think, lessons learned from the threats and the challenges that you still face, both inside your country, but also from outside?
First off, thank you very much for having me. Certainly, when we talk about Syria right now over the past 12 months, and particularly after the 8th of December, we can definitely talk about a success story, a success that was built by the Syrians themselves, and the Syrians who managed to tell the world very quickly that the Syrian people are capable of going beyond the past and capable of looking towards the future with confidence and with very strong will and determination. If we look at what has been accomplished over an entire year, of course, we still need a long way to go. We still have a long way to go in the coming years. However, the one thing with which we are happy is that we managed to restore the confidence of the Syrian people. This confidence that was eroded and distorted by the former regime, this confidence that was weakened by the former regime, this regime that portrayed to the entire world that the Syrian people is a people living under pressure, living under war. They are a weak people and they do not deserve to be amongst developed nations. And so what we are very proud to have accomplished is the fact that today the Syrian people regard themselves very confidently across the board in all fields. As far as lessons learned are concerned, any government that works for its country with faithfulness and with full force will definitely accomplish a lot, despite the very limited resources and despite the incredibly heavy legacy which we inherited from the former regime. However, the one thing that we bet on is that we started off with the support of our people, and this is what actually helped us deliver most of the successes over the past year. Another thing is the support that we received from our colleagues and our partners. Everybody stood by Syria, to be frank. Everybody stood by us over the past year, and definitely the next few years we'll see a lot of excitement, we'll see a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of looking to the future and moving towards the future. And the current stage gives us a lot of confidence. However, we are not satisfied with this result. The Syrian people deserve a better state compared to our current situation. And if we talk about the living situation and the economic situation, we are still suffering quite a lot. And there are still legal hurdles, particularly when it comes to the economic sanctions imposed on Syria, notably the Caesar law. So we still have a long way to go in that sense. However, what we can say right now is that we managed to restore the relationship between the Syrian people and their government.
Dr. Khulaifi, a similar question to you, starting out big picture. Qatar and your government has taken a strong and consistent stance on Syria since the very beginning, and I think was ideally placed to adapt to the fundamental transformation we saw a year ago. I mean, how would you characterize from Qatar's perspective how the past 12 months have gone? What are you envisioning from your policy perspective, what year two needs to look like? What are your new challenges as we enter into this second year of Syria's transition?
Thank you very much, Charles, and it's good to be in this panel with my distinguished colleagues. A few points to take into consideration when we're discussing the Syrian case. First of all, Qatar has been very firm when it comes to its position in full support of the Syrian people. In 14 years, we haven't changed that position. When we see the others, they were shifting in the political decision, we remain firm, believing strongly that this is the right path for the Syrians to restore their full rights, a country that is sovereign, that is prosperous, and providing an opportunity for the people to live a better life. This is something that is very critical in the top leadership of the country, following up the administrative bodies. And we've been very much engaged since day one of that topic. If you allow me, interesting fact, last year at this forum, in this hotel specifically, we were discussing the Syrian case, following up the movements by the Syrians on the ground. Interesting fact, we spent more than 4 or 5 hours with the group, the Astana group format, as well as regional countries, discussing what is going to be the next step. Is it going to be reasonable now for Bashar al-Assad to lower the bar and start engaging productively? But our friends and our brothers didn't save time, I think, for that operation. Things has moved so quickly. Our policy since day one, never shy out. Engage, go and talk to our brothers over there on the ground. Stretch our hands of support and help for the Syrian people and the Syrian government. And we've been very consistent, honestly, in terms of that help. We have a highly distinguished institutions, even at the humanitarian level. Qatar Funds for Development, education above all. All of them, they've been outreached over there and they've been engaged in several activities and projects within the Syrian government. I think in terms, if I want to assess the 12 months for Qatar's and Syria partnership, it's never been stronger. We've been so close and we've been very engaged in the different sectors, at the energy sectors, at the financial sectors, even at the international level. We've been very much supporting that Syrian cause because we strongly believe in it. We think this is the right pathway and this is what the Syrian people believes and deserves. And therefore I think how we see generally Syria, we see it regionally as well. We've seen the developments in the regional countries as well, and that brings, honestly, comfort at the decision makers levels in Doha and in the general wider scope. We've seen the developments in Lebanon, for example, with the election of presidents and the permanent government. We've seen the recent election in Iraq. All of them, that helps us that the movement is on the right pathway when it comes to the political stability. That helps us, but we will always consider ourselves a reliable partners for those regional countries, and we will continue to engage with them.
Thank you. Minister Eide, you as Foreign Minister of Norway, you were an early visitor to Damascus, and so you've visited and seen things from very early on since Assad's fall. Again, a similar question to you, but obviously from Norway's perspective and the wider European region, which traditionally has looked at Syria with different priorities. So from your perspective, what steps has Norway taken over the past 12 months to engage and to support Syria's transition? And as you look to year 2, with all of the challenges that Syria faces, as they pertain to Norway and to wider Europe, what's your assessment today?
Thank you, Charles. So I also vividly remember the Saturday of Doha Forum a year ago, where in the morning panels we were discussing whether ever Assad would go, and in the afternoon panel he had left. So, it was very much being present at a very historic moment. And I was looking back at the statement I made and many of my colleagues made, and found out that they were quite good. We said, this opens up an opportunity. It will not be easy. The new forces, the new government needs our support. We need to give this a chance. We shall not be naive, but we need a process that is Syrian-owned and Syrian-led, and we want an inclusive Syria. And I also argue that if we do not give this opportunity a chance, we will probably be right. I mean, if we assume it will fail, we will help it to fail. If we, however, we assume that it can succeed, we might contribute to the Syrian success, but the success has to be a Syrian success. And I must say, recognizing the long list of challenges that the government still faces, which, and let's not be naive, I think on balance, this year has been well spent. And I have to say, being a frequent critique of the international community, this time we got it right. There was a broad agreement from an surprisingly early stage that we should not leave the new government with inherited sanctions for the failures of a previous government. Well, let them at least do their own failures before we sanction them. And that argument, I went, as you said, early January, when an early visitor came out very strongly, arguing with our American friends, our European friends, we need to do something on these sanctions, and that largely worked. And I think that encouragement was so important, and my early meetings with President Al-Sharaa was very much focused on practical aspects of economy, the need for early recovery, to reap this peace dividend while people still had trust. And I'm proud that we were able to establish links on energy, on health, on transitional justice, on other key issues, but also increasingly working with the government. And we were early in working with the government directly, and in hindsight, I think we got it right this time.
Yes, absolutely. And Ambassador Barrack, just tying on to exactly what Minister Eide was just saying, on the question of engagement and sanctions and all of the developments we've seen take place over the last 6 months or so in particular, it's not a secret that there were components of the Trump administration that were probably skeptical of Syria when President Trump first came into the office. But of course in May, to the president's huge credit, he took the step to meet with President Al-Sharaa in Saudi Arabia and fundamentally changed the game. So my question to you really is just, what drove that decision? And the extraordinarily bold, I think, step that the US government has taken since, which has broken every record in terms of sanctions relief and diplomatic engagement in post-conflict environments.
Number one, thanks, Charles, for heading this super important panel. But I think, and you heard from Don Jr., who I'm so proud of for everything that he and his family has accomplished through great political battles. But with credit to my boss, President Trump, which is not political, right? The vagaries of the West are not attributed to one political party or another. But since 1916, the West has not done a very good job at guiding or providing architecture to this region. Since Sykes-Picot, almost every decision that the West has imposed on the region, rather than letting the region evolve itself, has been a mistake, and we're living with the aftermath of that. So, although President Trump may be unpredictable in some senses, he's really not. He's studied. And he saw the vagaries of the past, of what had happened with our interference in coups and regime change from World War II. We invented everything, right? We invented NATO. We invented the United Nations. We invented UNESCO. We invented the CIA. We invested the Marshall Plan. We invested Bretton Woods. And if you were to evaluate all of them and their efficacy on this region, you'd probably give them a very low mark. President Trump had studied the situation, and quite honestly, when he got off the plane in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and the Crown Prince had invited the foreign minister's boss, President al-Shara, he made a determination on the ground based on lots of study that this region is about athletes. It's not about federalism. It's not about democracy. It's not about centralization. It's about leadership. He decided, and spending some time with President al-Shara, that to give them a chance, to give this leader the opportunity to create their own architecture and allow it to happen without interference. So what we did, the contribution this time for America, was very different than it's ever been. We said, we're not going to labor you with hopes and expectations of a democratic structure that has never been feasible in the past. We're going to allow you to decide your own structure. Miraculously, in that 10 months, the foreign minister, who I spend a lot of time with, I applied to be his barista, but I can't keep up with him. He's a rocket ship. They all are. And I have to tell you, I think from President Trump and Secretary Rubio's point of view, which we do, in relieving them of sanctions, we go through a report card. If you remember, Secretary Rubio in March had sat down with Foreign Minister Al-Shaibani and given him a section of 8 expectations of things that you all want. Integration of all the communities, the continuing investigation into missing persons, the care and taking of camps, the dismantling of foreign fighters, the chemical weapons, which has always been an issue. And honestly, on those issues, for a very small team, in my humble personal opinion, I give them an A in all of those categories in which they had very limited resources. So I think President Trump's instincts, along with a very understandable team headed by Secretary Rubio in evaluating lessons of the past, was all about, let's pick the athletes, not necessarily the stadium. And in our estimation, it's heroic and epic what they've done in what will be 2 years and a couple of days. And what we all have to do is help them, entitle them, encourage them, and allow them to form the kind of government and inclusive regime that they, the Syrians, would like to do. But we're very proud of them.
Thank you very much. Minister Shaibani, back to you. When you entered Damascus, one of the things President Shara publicly announced very early on was the importance of Syria having a foreign policy that sought problems with nobody. In other words, a balanced foreign policy. You seek to engage with everyone, whether you have differences or similarities. And I think over the past year, I'm not an expert on Asia or other regions of the world, but I can't think of many countries around the world that have managed to sustain, especially in a complex post-conflict environment, a balanced relationship with every one of the world's major players and everyone in between. My question to you really is how long do you think that complex foreign policy can be sustained? It is going to get more complicated with time. Do you think that there will come a time when you'll have to start choosing to prioritize more in one direction than the other? Are you already facing that situation? And if you do, how will you deal with that challenge?
شكرا لك. بالتأكيد يعني
Thank you. Following the liberation of Syria and following the surprise that we felt given the downfall and the degradation of Syrian institutions, as well as the foreign policy legacy that we inherited from the fallen regime, we found out that relations were very bad with the neighboring countries, with Europe and with the United States, and there was a very long list of sanctions as well. So in a way, we were shocked when we saw all these restrictions that were definitely going to hinder the reconstruction phase that we started following the ousting or the toppling of the regime on the next day. So having a balanced foreign policy in any country in the Middle East is probably one of the toughest things, something that every single country is trying to accomplish. Every country tries to maintain a balanced foreign policy, given, of course, the level of polarization in the world, and given the sensitivity towards any polarization of any tendency. Of course, we have a very deep reading and study of every move we make, every statement we make, every political project we engage in, and every international engagement. We realize that as a Middle East country, we are definitely under the lens, under the microscope. But a country such as Syria definitely needs a calm relationship with everyone. And we need our countries to help us with this policy. We set out the intentions, we set out the moves. However, the response from other countries should also help us accomplish this mission, because we are rebuilding a country that suffered a 14-year war, and we definitely need a lot of friends. We need all the friends we can get. We can't pick and choose. We can't be selective, and we cannot resort to alignments, even the traditional ones, because any alignment will definitely hinder or hamper the reconstruction phase. So after we got rid of the destruction regime, which is the former regime, we set up the construction government, and the construction or reconstruction government needs security, stability domestically, and stability internationally and regionally. And this is what we're working towards with our regional partners and international partners. We need intense economic development, we need investment opportunities, and we need diplomacy that will facilitate these two pillars that I talked about. Of course, today, if we look at Syria, we have a lot of good relationships across the board, and we hope that this experience will be a source of inspiration in the region. We believe that we will be successful because there is an international will in order to ensure our success, and there is quite a lot of admiration because the diplomacy we have in Syria is clear, transparent, and to put it blankly, we don't beat around the bush. We focus on one objective. We have suffered greatly as a result of the war. We want to rebuild our country, and so we need all the friends we can get. We do not want to be part of any alignments. So I think, given this contest so far, we have succeeded. Perhaps in the future there will be challenges, and potentially Syria might be dragged into sensitive situations. However, we will always try to refocus our policy. We are at the same distance from everyone, and we want good relations with everyone, relations built upon collaboration and economic and political partnerships.
Thank you. So just to exactly tie into that question, Your Excellency Khulaifi, the Middle East has experienced quite a profound time of crisis over the past couple of years. And there's a sense to which, whether you look, west, east, north or south, the region appears to be in a state of flux. Of course, the aspiration and the objective here is that this should all offer an opportunity for a more peaceful future. And I think Syria has a kind of central role geographically as well as strategically to play in there. But as Minister Shaibani was just saying, there is the potential that Syria could face some sensitive geopolitical challenges in the coming month. And of course, there are sensitive internal challenges in Syria too. So I just wonder, without wanting to put more things on your very busy agenda, is there an opportunity for a country like Qatar, which specializes so much in mediation, to attempt to tackle or add to the attempts to tackle some of those sensitive geopolitical challenges that surround Syria today?
Well, first of all, Syria is on my agenda. And on behalf of the state of Qatar, we've been, as I told you, the strategy is to continue our direct engagement with our Syrian colleagues on the different sectors. In the past 12 months, we were focusing on the main infrastructure within the country, aviation, financial industry, energy. The projects that we have accomplished so far is pleasing. However, it's still not enough. There are still more potential for Syria to prosper with other areas and other fields. And I believe the openness that we have seen from President Bashar and from the governments to international investors to join and play an important role within the future of Syria is something that very critical and will put Syria in a unique place in the future. One element which worries us a lot is the security element. This is something that I believe, and I had a thorough discussion with our savvy lawyer and friend, savvy ambassador, I apologize, and friend Tom Barrack on the security element and the importance for Syria to be preserved and the people will feel safe within the country. It's something that is extremely important. The Israeli aggression on Syria is unacceptable, and this is something that needs to stop. Syria needs to be provided with the opportunity to do that, and we've been calling for the international community to hold that responsibility of preventing any further escalations on Syria. This is something that is equally treated on Lebanon, where we see the government is acting around the clock in developing and improving the internal situation in the country. So those countries in the region needs to be provided with that opportunity. And I believe empowering in the next phase, if I can see how Syria can move in the next phase, focusing on that security element is something that is extremely important. We will continue our engagement with the Syrian governments on that angle and other angles as well, and also our direct coordination at the international level. I mean, you might heard in the past of what we call by the Friends of Syria. This is an important group. We needed to revive the international coordination on the Syrian file to put it on top when it comes to the important matters that the Syrian governments needs to take into look, or even work closely with the Syrian governments to overcome many of those challenges. I believe in the upcoming months, it will be very critical for us to engage even further, to work closely with the Syrian governments to combat many of those challenges and especially the security threats that the Syrians are facing, encouraging and continue to encourage the governments to take the important steps for the Syrian people. And I believe we had a very thorough and transparent engagement also with the Syrian governments on that line. I honestly, among the other cases, and you gave us a very good introduction about the, sorry to say this, but the unfortunate situation that our Middle East is in, that there are still hope. And we see hope in Syria. And we think the future will be, inshallah, better. Thank you.
Yes, inshallah. I totally agree. And I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of greater levels of international coordination and coordination with Damascus. And I think as we enter year 2, that will be all the more important. Minister Eide, on a slightly different tack, the international aid space has taken a significant hit and challenge over the recent years, not just because of instability, but of course, significant cuts from the United States have placed more of a burden on other traditional donors to the international aid world, of which Norway has played traditionally a significant role. And the issue on Syria, of course, is that we are now in transition, and so we will see a pivot away from aid and more towards early recovery, and of course investment once the Caesar Act, we hope, is removed within days. But nevertheless, there is still a huge strain in there. And in Syria, there is still huge need for similar activities as we pivot more towards that investment direction. So really just from your perspective, but also from Norway's wider engagement within Europe and the rest of the international community, are there efforts underway to try and fill some of those gaps in a case of like Syria?
Thank you. Let me just one sentence on the geopolitics, because I think the best thing Syria can do for the geopolitics of the region is exactly what it does, which is to focus on Syria. And I see the Prime Minister of Lebanon. I think it's quite welcome for some of the neighbors that Syria focuses on Syria, because we've had Syrians who focused on other things, and breaking the the direct geographical link between Iran and Hezbollah, for instance, is an improvement in regional security. And that's just because Syria focused on Syria. And I think other countries in the neighborhood, including Israel, should, contrary to what they are doing, they should actually recognize that we have a Syria that wants to be Syrian-led and Syrian-owned, but with a focus on rebuilding Syria. Which brings me to your question, because if that's good for geopolitics, it means that the rest of us would be well advised to help them to recover quickly. And we, for our sake, for Norway's sake, is that we've already moved beyond early recovery. We're into long-term recovery, to long-term investments and developments. Of course, it's early days for classical investments, but focusing on energy, for instance, is a very important prerequisite for other industrial initiatives, for rebuilding of key infrastructures. So working on, not only humanitarian aid and early recovery, but actually engaging in economic development, where you'll need some help from your friends. But Syria is a country of traders. It's in the middle of the region. There's a tremendous economic potential that the president and the foreign minister and others keep speaking about. So it's really to connect to that, and let's not wait too long, because if we don't act early, more negative trends can follow. Not necessarily to comment on American developments, but it is a problem that development support from traditional donors is falling. It happens with USAID, but it also happens with other countries, sometimes for ideological reasons, sometimes more for lack of money. That means that the rest of us who are still in need to use our money smarter, and also think about how state development money can also in a more immediate and faster way, inspire private investments and more traditional economic recovery and opening up for trade.
Thank you. Ambassador Barrack, this is a tricky question here, which is, rightly or wrongly, correctly or incorrectly, the United States often gets lumped with the responsibility to fix big problems. And when it comes to Syria, the issue of Israel has come up repeatedly, and I think that remains a significant challenge. And I know one that you have been engaged in. But also the integration of the Syrian Democratic Forces into the state, which has been a challenging file for the last 10 months or so, as well as the challenge related to Sweden. And I noticed yesterday that we now have State Department engagement with the Sweden file, with some meetings that were held yesterday. So I just wonder if I could ask you for perhaps to update the audience on where those three particularly thorny geopolitical and internal challenges stand, and where your and the United States engagement stands on those.
Thanks for that very simple question. Look, everything is in process, and let's start from the beginning of America's point of view. America was engaged in one of the most brutal battles ever in history, called the Civil War. Now, all of us in the Western world no longer want to talk about minorities, but the Civil War was a majority in the Union versus a minority, which was Confederates. And we have spent 100 years trying to define, what is that? Is that a federation? Is it a republic? Is it a union? What is it? How do you blend these communities, which have different cultural aspects and different desires, different religions, different educational formats, hundreds of years of their own history, in a country like America, which has a new beginning? How do you do it in a civilization that has thousands of years of history, in which survival was based on the tribe, it was based on family, it was based on your brother? Then it evolved to a community, and then from a community it evolved to religion, and from religion then it evolved into sectors, and ultimately we invented nation states. There was no such thing until the beginning of the 1900s. So blending these very difficult issues, America has taken the point of view of unwrapping the problems that lead to those solutions. And we're trying to do the same thing with Lebanon. We have great new leadership everywhere. Great new leadership in Syria, great new leadership with the Prime Minister Nouaf and President Aoun in Lebanon, great new leadership here, and thank you for hosting, I think, what we all feel is one of the most important forums where we can actually have these discussions. In Qatar with Sheikh Tamim, MBS in Saudi Arabia, MBZ and UAE, we have a new set of opportunities. First thing that has to happen is we have to allow them, Syria, to define it themselves without going in with Western expectations of saying we want a democracy in 12 months. We've never had a democracy anyway. I don't see a democracy. Israel can claim that it's a democracy, but in this region, really what's worked the best, whether you like it or you don't like it, is a benevolent monarchy. That's the function of what's worked. So we're inventing something else. And every time the West steps in and says, okay, here is a kind of parliamentary dialogue that we want to have. Every time we step in, whether it's Libya, Iraq, all of the places that we've been to try and create a colonialized mandate, it has not been very successful. We end up with paralysis. So our view is give direction. All of us need to weigh in, not criticize, not say we need more foreign fighters released more quickly, not say we need more missing persons found more readily, not say the communities are being punished unfairly until they, in baby steps, get there. They just have taken over command and control. They need stability first. We need to give them the opportunity to incorporate all points of view, but at the end of the day, all points of view don't create a nation. They need to define what creates a nation. Is that centralization? Is it federalization? Is it a hybrid? What is it going to be? And from America's point of view, what we've learned is we are not good at imposing those expectations, especially in the Middle East, on others. Israel is a confusing situation. What I think this president and Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff have done, hand in hand with Qatar, by the way, and I'm here to tell you as a soldier on the ground, none of this would happen. Whatever we think about what happened in Israel, the greatest thing that ever happened is we got a ceasefire and return of hostages. It would not have happened without Qatar's intervention. It would just not have happened. And one of the most disappointing things, and I heard it was a great discussion between Tucker Carlson and Sheikh Mohammed. I'm telling you as somebody who's been in the middle of this, Sheikh Mohammed, under the Emir's tutelage, was the most important person for us to keep a dialogue with Hamas. No matter how the West views it, they were wrong. If we didn't have that, if Turkey didn't step in alongside, who was also criticized for having a dialogue with Hamas, we would not be where we are today. So we have to take a look at that as we look at Syria and Israel. It's baby steps. It's baby steps with Israel. It's a process, right? It's not an event. We're going to have speed bumps. We're going to have atrocities that continue. We're going to have dilemmas. We need to bring Lebanon and Syria together and aligned, two of the most ancient and beautiful civilizations. Iraq is having the same dilemma through paralysis in its own parliamentary process. We don't want to interfere in those political discussions. My hope and my belief is that we're going to go from the payphone to satellites. We're not going to have the iterative process. And the young leadership that we have in Syria, in Lebanon, in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE holding their hands, I have great hope. But it takes all of us relieving the pressure we're putting on these places with what our expectations from the West are and giving them resources that they need.
Please.
Can I just, I very much would like to second that. I think what Tom Barrack just said is incredibly important. When we say Syrian-owned and Syrian-led, it also means that we have to accept that they will find their way. The Syrian government tells us that they want an inclusive government. I welcome that. I think that's wise. But it's a Syrian choice, not my choice, nor America's choice. It's something they do. And I think we Westerners, historically, which I very much like to your point, is that we tend to forget how states emerge. You know, states emerge because somebody takes power, consolidates power against somebody else, and eventually you build a structure around that, and rule of law and so on comes later. And you know, it was not like, there was a country called Syria, it's still the same country, but it's not like a state that was ready and you just change a few people at the top. You actually have to consolidate that power in order to be able to do anything in that place. And this is sometimes overlooked. So I think a mature recognition of how these things work in practice is very welcome, will actually bring us further towards something that is stable and lasting in Syria. So I think that was really wise words.
Thank you for adding that. Minister Shaibani, I want to sort of bring back the same question I asked Ambassador Barrack, but of course get your opinion on it. The challenge that you face with your Israeli neighbors is growing, I think. Last month, for the first time, we had more than 100 ground incursions in 30 days. On average, throughout the rest of the year, we've had half that. So a doubling of ground incursions in a month in November, which places very significant pressure on you and your government. Can you give us a bit of an update on what looks like a stalled track of direct talks which you had been engaged in, whether there is a prospect for that to be renewed, and of course, most importantly, what are your positions with regards to those talks? What are your red lines? What is your vision for where those talks would go in an ideal world?
Thank you for the question. One of the main challenges that the Syrian people is dealing with today, and that Syria is dealing with today in this transitional phase, is Israel, the Israeli issue. Since the 7th of December from last year until today, Israel has been the concerning party for Syria, sorry. And if we do not work on these policies of Israel against Syria, there will always be attempts of destabilization. However, we were successful in gaining a lot of support to support Syria, mainly the United States. I think that they are the main supporters of a security deal with Israel, and this is what we are working on. The red line for us is withdrawal of Israel from Syrian territory. We cannot enter into a deal while Israel is in Syrian territories after the 8th of December. And there must be a bilateral and just and fair approach to take into consideration both the Syrian and the Israeli sides. It is an integrated approach. It cannot be a one-sided approach. There must be mutual respect. And we want Israel to stop interfering in Syrian affairs and stop also betting on the movements of some Syrian sects or components. This will backfire. Today, Syria is focused on Syria. We want to build good relations with everyone, including Israel, and we are compliant with the 1974 agreement and with the approach under the United States, or with the United States' help with Israel. I think that Syria has been much more mature in its approach than Israel, which describes itself as the only democracy in the Middle East. However, the Syrian approach, even though it is still nascent, has proven that it is more diplomatic, that it is wiser, more reasonable, and we were able to gain the support of the international economy to support Syria on this path, the latest of which was reflected in the vote that acknowledged the Golan Heights as a Syrian territory. 25 countries supported this last year in their vote.
And Minister, I might just follow up with one more question before we run out of time, to ask you about more on the side of economics and the economy. We are in Washington expecting some good news with regards to the repeal of the Caesar Act, which I think will be a huge opening of the window for all of the investment interest that has been declared, including here from Qatar and from the United States and elsewhere, From a very personal perspective, and I've been back to Syria 5 times since January, I've increasingly heard from ordinary Syrians the idea that, you know, with sanctions out of the way, there is an expectation of rapid improvements in terms of the quality of living. You know, how are you dealing with that challenge that all post-conflict countries will deal with, that the people expect more than is necessarily practical? There's a huge amount of reconstruction and rehabilitation that has to happen before we can see those real significant benefits. So how do you deal with that challenge, both, of course, from as you as the foreign minister, but more widely as the government?
إذا ما بما يخص الوضع في سوريا خاصة بعد
As far as the situation in Syria is concerned, particularly post-December 8th, I believe we've had a great number of successes. However, we are still left with a large number of challenges. We have a logical approach and we recognize reality on the ground. Of course, if the entire world came together and tried to change the situation in Syria within a single year from a country under conflict to an advanced country, of course, this requires time, not only resources, and it also needs sustainable planning. However, going back to what I said in the beginning, the one important thing is that we managed to reinforce the Syrian people's confidence in themselves, and this is our real capital. The Syrian people believe that they can play a real part in the reconstruction of their country. Another thing is that the current Syrian government came from the Syrian people. We have been through the exact same suffering that the Syrian people have been through over the past few years. And if we look at every government ministry, they each have a development plan, each in their sector. Of course, there are examples of improvements we managed to score in Syria, particularly in terms of security, transportation, and energy. Now, regarding political freedom, regarding rights, regarding political participation, and regarding belonging, which was something that we severely lacked and something that was not on the agenda for the Syrian people. In the past, Syrian people felt like strangers in their own homeland, and I believe we've really managed to rectify that. If we draw a very simple comparison between December 8th, 2024 and December 8th today, Syria was probably one of the issues of inconvenience in the White House. However, today, the U.S. administration expressly points to Syria as a partner nation. Additionally, as far as the European Union is concerned, Syria was more of a humanitarian subject. Everybody was trying to figure out how to send aid to Syria, how to stop migration that's coming from Syria. However, now European countries are talking about remigration to Syria, and they are talking about investing in Syria. Another thing, Syria was often perceived to be a source of threat. However, today it is a model for inspiration and for success. The Syrian people themselves look to the future with fear and despair. They did not even dare look to the future because they often believed that the future will be bleak. However, now they are running towards the future because they believe that the future will give them the country they've always longed for. So if we look at the moral accomplishments we've managed to deliver, if we look at how we managed to once again portray Syria in a new light, I believe we've been very successful. Now, as far as services are concerned, as far as the economy is concerned, this will be our major point of focus in the year 2026 and the coming years as well, across the board, across all sectors. Of course, our main focus is on service sectors. Industry has returned to Syria, and I believe major and essential sectors have breathed a sigh of life in collaboration with American companies, Qatari companies, Saudi companies, and Turkish companies as well. We see a lot of will to invest in Syria, and this is good. So if we look at the Syrian people, if we look at Syria as a country, we can confidently say that we are not scared of economic progress, of improving our living standards, because we have a real capital, which is the people of Syria. What we fear, however, are the security threats that we see, be it from ISIS, from the Israelis, or cross-border militias that are not necessarily satisfied with the change that has occurred in Syria. And I believe that in next year's edition of Doha Forum, we will hopefully be talking about real models of success on the ground that has been delivered in Syria, especially that Today, this is something we're working on. Another thing we have to recognize is that there is an international will and desire to see Syria as a successful country following the toppling of the regime. Everybody wants to see Syria moving towards an inspiring regime, a regime that will lift the morale not just of its own people, but also in the Middle East and abroad.
Took the words out of my mouth. That was going to be my closing, which is, yes, hopefully when we gather here a year from now, we will be celebrating even greater achievements of stability and prosperity for Syria. The only other thing I will say here is thank you to all of our esteemed panelists. I wish we had another 45 minutes. And in the meantime, good luck to Syria tonight.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you to all your panelists for this engaging discussion. I will not stand between all of you and one of the most anticipated moments of the day, lunch. But we hope to see you back here at 1:45 when we resume with a newsmaker interview with the Lebanese Prime Minister, Dr. Nawaf Salam. We'll see you back here at 1:45. Thank you.